Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I get caught with this many times. When you buy a plant, you get pictures, or you should do. You might not from a nursery of the actual plant, but you know, even if you go somewhere and actually pick the plant up, unless there's other plants there as an example, how do you know you've got a mature plant? Sometimes the number of canes or pseudobulbs doesn't actually tell you. But this one is a good progression as such. I mean, I bought this as quite a young, compact plant, but had no idea of what size it was supposed to get to before it bloomed. Well, it actually bloomed on one of these shorter canes, I forget which, because oh, there it is, there's the little spike. So it bloomed on that cane. It then pushed up that cane. That's nearly twice as long as the previous canes. It does actually have a sheath on it as well. But now it's pushed up this cane. So how mature a plant was that? It was obviously quite a young plant at the time I got it. Just because it had quite a few canes and it managed to bloom doesn't mean it's a mature plant, but at least it had the capabilities of blooming. Single bloom on one spike on a cane that size, so there's no reason why that sheath shouldn't produce a bloom. I think this has single blooms, but that may have been just because it was effectively a young plant, so it was only capable of pushing up one bloom. It may have multiple blooms. I've got a feeling this is Dendrobium fleckeri. But anyway, you know, that's the latest cane, and again, these are all two-leafed canes. This one's got three. So it's a progression. You can see these are the original canes that I bought. That's the last one I grew that's now mature. And this is the latest one. So that's the progression. I suspect subsequent canes are going to be like this. They might even be bigger. But we'll have to wait and see. But sometimes it's not that easy to tell whether you've got a flowering sized plant or not. I mean, just as an example, this little miniature bulbophyllum next to it, this is named after the range of hills in northern India, I believe, Sycamore, and I think there are a range of hills called the Sikkim Hills where quite a lot of orchids come from. It's unusual because that range of hills has got quite a few of the resting type dendrobiums that come from that area. Well, what do I do with that then? That's not a dendrobium, it's a bulbophyllum. But if it comes from the same sort of area as those dendrobiums, this would get quite dry in the winter and quite bright light. So, you know, not all bulbophyllums are the same, and I don't quite know what to do with that. At the moment it's pushing up new growths, and it's grown quite a few new growths this year, but no blooms. Maybe come the spring and the longer days it could have quite a few spikes at the same time, but wait and see. I haven't had it that long. But yeah, I mean, this is another classic example. This is, depending on how you want to say it, Lodigessii or Lodigessii. I wouldn't mind a definitive argument on that. It's a single G with a vowel either side of it. Given that most of this is of Latin origin, yeah, is that a soft G or a hard G? Is it Lodigessii or Lodigessii? Is it going to make a lot of difference to my life when I find out? No. But that's a resting dendrobium. I don't know whether that's a full-size plant. I've seen plants blooming around that size, but this is its first winter, so I don't know. But what I do know is this likes to grow flat. So I'm seriously thinking of taking that cane at least and actually strapping it to the base like that. Because this plant has a tendency to arch over and touch its base, and then it forms little plantlets along the length, so it ends up with like a dense mat but flat on the ground, rather than all the canes being growing away from the plant. I mean, a lot of them in the wild seem to be a combination. They have a lot of flat growths with lots of new little ones coming out, and some of them do grow away, you know, and grow towards the light basically, but a lot of them lie flat. So it's got an unusual growth habit, but this is its first winter. If it blooms, I'll be over the moon, because they are very attractive, but it's a wait and see. But you know, I mean, I'm watering today and it's Mount's day, so this one is resting as far as I'm concerned. So the amount of water it had was a little bit down the side of that mount. You can just see where there's a few green roots there. I didn't get any on the moss, yeah, and down that side as well, and a little bit over those aerial roots, and just water, no feed. So that's that one. This one, however, is not a resting type. This has just had an absolute soaking with feed. Yeah, so it's, that's what I do. I basically start with clean water, water the resting ones if they're due to have some, and they only get a tiny little bit, and then I add my feed and adjust my pH if I feel like it, and carry on from there. So it's one of those days. I don't think there's going to be a lot else to discuss really, but it's quite difficult to know whether you've got a blooming size plant or not. You know, you're dependent on pictures. I mean, you know, if you bought a little plant like that, I mean, that if you didn't know that was a genuine miniature, you'd probably think you'd got several young plants strapped onto a mount because it's so small. But obviously this is, I've had this a while now, this is fully blooming size, and that's as big as the bulbs and leaves get. It's a genuine miniature. And it's produced a lot of growths, and they're all deciding to bloom at the same time. It's looking quite good. I'm well pleased with that. That's the best blooming I've ever had on that. Very nice. A bit dubious about that leaf there. In fact, it's gone. One thing I will say about these, they are incredibly susceptible to water damage on the leaves and pseudobulbs. But that leaf has gone. I need to get that off. I can't do that with one hand. But you've got to go ever so careful with getting water on these. They're very prone to having an adverse effect with water. And that's probably all that is I've got a little bit of water in there just as it was opening, and it's decided to keel over. I don't think it'll affect the bloom spikes, but I'd rather that leaf was off than on. So I'll do that now. Okay, that's got that leaf out of the way. There's a tiny little spot there. And there's that big leaf there, has got some damage on it, and it is water damage, I can guarantee. But you have to ask yourself, well, what would happen to that in the wild then? It would get rained on and it would get absolutely soaking wet. Yeah, but what happens next? Chances are it comes from an area that gets quite high air movement. Now that's me guessing, I don't know that for a fact. But if it is a bit susceptible to water damage, how else could it cope? Unless all the ones in the wild look really manky with tatty leaves and leaves that rot and drop off, which is obviously not how it is. So, you know, the only thing I can think of is this is in an area that is subject to quite high air movement. And so when the plants do get wet, they dry off quickly. You know, it's only a guess, but it's a bit of logic really if you think about it. You know, I mean, some plants come from the sort of montane forests, like some of the Masdevallias and Ristrepias and a lot of the Pleurothalids and some others. You know, they're almost constantly soaking wet, but they don't all go rotten and fall apart. And a lot of it is just down to the acclimatisation to their atmosphere around them, what they're used to, and whether or not the air moves. I mean, it's like the little Tolumnias. I mean, they get absolutely soaking wet when it rains, but they come from the Caribbean area. A lot of them are island dwellers. They come from the smaller islands and things like that. And, you know, if you've ever been on the beach in areas like that, there's a breeze. There's a sea breeze. The air moves. And, you know, I can't really stress the importance of keeping your air moving, especially in lower temperatures. You don't want a force 8 gale when the temperatures are cool, because that is endearingly known as a cold draft. There is a subtle difference. But trying to grow orchids in cold temperatures with still air is a recipe for problems, basically. But anyway, that just lost me a leaf. That was probably nothing more than a few drops of water got caught in there. Maybe that day it got watered a bit later in the day than it should have done. Go into the nighttime temperatures, you know, it's easily done. And yet others you can get absolutely soaking wet and they don't care. Well, that one doesn't like it, really doesn't. And if I didn't say what it was, it was Sophronitis. It's now Cattleya cernua. But that's the best blooming I've had on that little beauty. Pleased with it, but can do without leaves dropping off like that. There's no sign of any on the others. You know, there's lots of new growths that have just opened with their blooms. All the other leaves are fine, just that one. Yeah. So, as I said, probably got a bit of water in there that I didn't notice and forgot to huff and puff it off. Because that's what I do if I get water on a leaf. I can show you. I'll even show you on that. You get water on a leaf, there it is gone. Yeah, just a blast. Don't do that in a small pot with small bark or you'll end up with bark all over the place. But certainly on leaves, if you give them a short sharp blast of air like that, it takes the water straight off. Does the job. It's difficult to believe what this little Tolumnia is up to. Single spike, original blooms here. Yeah, put out a little side branch, and some of those blooms have gone over. These are the last two. Look what it's doing. It's branching again. It's branching off the branch. So another set of blooms to come on there. The other spike's developing quite nicely as well. Those blooms will be open soon. Yeah, so I mean that's a progression of blooms on this. It was in bloom when I got it. It's been in bloom ever since, and it's going to continue. Smashing little plant, that one. You listening, you other lot up there? Lazy lot. That's the only Tolumnia blooms I've got at the moment. And I don't see any signs of spikes on the others, apart from one that shouldn't have a spike. But yeah, again, the plants are pushing on nicely. They all, I don't know whether I can get back far enough, they all live up here. There is one at the top there with a spike, which, as I said, I shouldn't really let that bloom because that's one of the ones with little if no roots. But the others are pushing out roots and new growths now, so they're on the road to recovery. They're not doing too bad. That one's not. I'm not sure that one's going to make it. And that one's iffy. But, oh, somebody asked about my Senili. So while I'm up there, pointing at the roof, it's growing well. And it's going to carry on growing well through the winter. That is not getting any form of rest whatsoever. That's getting watered and fed. I want to build the strength of this plant up and grow it on, ticking over during the winter obviously, because it won't be in massive growth, but it's got new growths. It's pushing out new growths and leaves and roots. It'd be silly to stop its progress now. So I'm going to keep that one going. And then I'll grow it on through the next growing season, and hopefully by the end of next year I'm going to have a big plant. I may then think about giving it its proper rest in the winter. We shall see. You never know with some dendrobiums. You know, I got this year at Malvern, so I got it in the middle of the growing season. Depending on what's happened to that plant in the past, this plant could be out of season. And that might mean it'll just bloom anyway. But I've only ever managed to get, not this one, the previous one, to bloom once. And then in the process of resting what wasn't a very healthy plant last winter, I lost the plant altogether. So this is a replacement, and quite honestly, it's doing pretty good. It's not one plant. That bottom little plant, those little dead bits, that one died. That was a tiny little piece. I think there are 3 other pieces on there. There's 2 clustered together there. I believe they're separate, and then the one over to the left, which is quite honestly the best bit. But whether it's one plant or 3 plants, once it all intertwines and gets going, it's going to look like one plant anyway. But we'll see what happens with that. But I'm certainly not resting it. It's in active growth with roots. So that's going to get some feed today. Winter or not. You're going to get pushed. And that's how I work with some of my dendrobiums. I ignore their winter rest for the health of the plant. I'll worry about blooms later down the line, when the plant's strong enough and vigorous enough and healthy enough and all that sort of stuff. So no rest for you, my friend. Coming on well. And my Riding Host Stylus Gigantea has opened enough to see the colours on it now. I mean, obviously the spike's not fully open yet, but there's enough open blooms now to actually see what the colours are, and I'm pleased that it's a blotchy one, because some of them are spotty, more like the buds, more like the back of the blooms, and some of them are like that on the front too, which means you haven't got quite as much colour. But being a more, well, we'll call them large spots rather than blotches, because they are round, not irregular. But yeah, I'm pleased with the colour on that. It is quite a typical coloration, but some of them can be very pale with very little amounts of colour, and some of them can be virtually no white. You know, there's nearly all colour. They are very variable. I mean, this has got no variety name on it. It didn't have that when I got it. It may well have a variety name, but I wouldn't know what it was. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's just the species. And they are variable anyway within the species. So, yeah, but I'm pleased. I've got a flower spike on this for the first time. So, and it's a nice colour. Yeah, nice deep purple, you'd have to call that. It's not magenta, it's actually purple. And a creamy background, so quite pleased with that. No fragrance showing as yet, but then these blooms have only just opened. I mean, if you think about it, the large cattleya up here, that had no fragrance for nearly a week. And then it had a gentle fragrance. Now today, with the brighter light in here, the fragrance from that cattleya is filling the room, because it hasn't got any competition at the moment. There's nothing else. Well, actually, the twinkle's pushing out a little bit, but that's over the other side. But over this side, that cattleya is very fragrant. Right, what else? Well, I'm really enjoying this extra sunshine. I hope the plants are as well, and we're not, you know, I have felt the leaves, they do warm up, but it is for a relatively short time, so there's an element of risk. But I'm giving it a go. You can only try these things, can't you? That's virtually it for today. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, for those who are mildly interested, I managed to get the car started yesterday, put it in for a diagnostic which they run this morning. The guys just literally phoned me up, just got off the phone, and one of the sensors is faulty. It's not sending a direct signal to the engine management computer, which means it's making adjustments falsely, which is why it's not starting. So he's quite happy he's found the problem, and he says there's potentially a problem with another sensor, but he thinks the only reason that's given a false reading is because of the faulty one, and when the faulty one's fixed, the other one will be fine. But the beauty of getting somebody like that to do it, he has the whole world scouring the whole country at the moment trying to find the part. Because, I mean, Saab went out of production a while ago, and although there are several substitute manufacturers still creating parts for those cars, because there's a lot of them still around, they're not necessarily going to do all of them, and those that don't go wrong very often are difficult. But he's got the whole world looking for a part, and the beauty of him doing it is if he replaces the part and it doesn't fix the problem, he can send it back and get a refund and try the other one. So it's in good hands, I believe. But I'm still carless. It's driving me up the wall. But it's being worked on, and it sounds like they've found the problem. That was the bit I couldn't do. So the only other thing I wanted to say was this little pinguicula's opened, and I am pleased. That's a very attractive little flower. This bloom down here, that particular pinguicula will not stand its spikes upright. They always hang over sideways. But we have another one that's pushed the bud up. This is one of my new ones, as is this, and this one over here. And that one looks like it's going to be a nice deep purple, looking at the colour of the bud. So that are good. I mean, the pinguiculas seem to be doing quite well in here. They have a trait that depends on temperatures, basically. A lot of the tropical pinguiculas, I'm not on about native European ones and things like that. I mean, they go totally dormant, and most of them lose their leaves in the winter, and then they come back when the better weather comes. But these type, the more tropical types, have the capability of two types of leaves. And if they chill down a bit, or they're not happy with their environment, they effectively dump the carnivorous type leaves and grow succulent leaves to get them through the harder times. and then those are replaced by the carnivorous type leaves come the better times. Now I'm hoping that in my environment they're not going to do that, and they'll be continuous growers and do their job catching these dratted little flies, which is what they do. And some of them are doing it very well. I am pleased. If you look at some of these leaves here, these little beasties would be buzzing around in my face if it wasn't for these plants. And that used to be a problem. They're annoying. I don't think they do any real harm, but they're annoying. They just get in your face. They drive me up the wall. And since I got a few of these in, they are, I won't say they're non-existent, but the frequency of me getting one, you know, in my face, much to my annoyance, has gone down to next to nothing. So they're doing their job. I'm well pleased. And I'm not going into lots of different plants out here. This is an orchid grow room, so I'm not having lots of nepenthes and all sorts of other types of things that a lot of people mix up, succulents, and I'm not doing it. I mean, I've got my little group of air plants up there, which I'm happy that can just stay up there, and when I remember they get some water, which they've had today. I've got my Spanish moss. Amazing how fast that dries. That was left to soak for nearly 10 minutes, less than an hour ago, and it was bright green and dripping all over the place, and it's already gone back to its sort of pale grey colour. But the Spanish moss is growing quite well. It's, you know, the bunches have extended quite a bit this year. I'm pleased. That's about it then for today, because I really do want to get on with some other stuff. There's one thing niggling in my mind, and I can't think. Oh yes, it's in here, isn't it? That's why. The Paphiopedilum is now open. I doubt if the light's very good on that. I'm not mucking about getting plants down and things like that, but as I said, as it opens, the wings, as I call them, get more horizontal, and it gives a much nicer look to the actual bloom. And it's quite a large bloom. You know, I mean, some paths aren't that large. That's quite a good size, and I like the patterning and the hairy bits and the warts and all that sort of stuff. I quite like that one. It's one I've had a long time. And the Mordier is just opening. Now that's not a spectacular bloom in colour terminology, because it only has two colours. It's white and green. That's it. But it's what I call a simplistic bloom, and it has a delicate beauty. Not all things have to be bright and, you know, rainbow coloured to actually look good. I don't think there's much else going on in here. There's some spikes coming up on Phalaenopsis. This little Phalaenopsis has got a second bloom open now, third one shortly to go, and my not too well Psychopsis, that green on the bud is just starting to extend, so we'll have another one of those blooms in probably about 4 weeks, maybe 5, but it's at least not lost its bud, even though the plant's not too happy. But its latest growth is good. It's got a good leaf, and I still can't see roots going down in the pot. But what I do know is that since it was taken out of its rubbish media and cleaned up and put in some moss, which I let it get virtually dry before I water it. But it's in the house now, it's in drier air, so I don't want to let the bottom of the plant get dry as well. But the older bulbs are plumped up, so it's taking in some moisture. Now all we need is a new set of roots like the other one, because the other little one, which I can't get at, let's see if I can point the camera, is up there. And that's sat in moss with chunky bark in the bottom. Now that's got a nice new growth coming up at the base of the spike. You can just about see it. I'm standing on tiptoe here again. But that has a pot full of roots now. So that one's recovering quite nicely. But I've got a horrible feeling I may have lost the spike. There's no green showing at the top of the spike, so I might have to wait for a new one, in which case that's a long way off flowering, because a new spike on a Psychopsis can take a year to get to the point where a bud forms. Very slow growing. And this Sweet Memory, it is branching. I wasn't expecting that to happen. I was expecting this to extend. Well, it isn't. It's just sat there doing nothing. But it's still bright green. I mean, that's got life in it throughout its length. And back here, it looks like it's going to branch. Quite honestly, for me, that's a bonus, because if it's going to bloom closer to the plant, for me, that always looks more attractive. You know, when you've got a plant one side of your grow room and the bloom's the other side, you know, some of these spikes can get pretty long. They don't appeal to me anymore, I'm afraid. So if this is going to bloom closer to the plant, I'll be happy. There's a lovely new leaf growing on it. These leaves are enormous on this thing, absolutely enormous. And fat, not only long, but fat. But they're lovely, lovely leaves. I like those a lot. But yeah, if this branch successfully pushes out and there's no real signs of life here, I'm going to chop that spike to make sure it can only bloom from back here. I'll force it back towards the plant, and then I'll enjoy the blooms better. How long they're going to take, I haven't a flipping clue. But everything in here is sort of doing okay. It's probably not getting as much light as it could do with, but it doesn't seem, they don't seem to be suffering in here. The only thing I have got to watch, because they're in a much drier atmosphere, the pots are also, and warmer temperatures, the pots are drying faster than they ever have done. So things like my Paphiopedilums, if they were still out in the grow room, they'd probably be on a 7 or 8 day watering cycle, because I like to get them almost dry in the cooler months. But now they're in here, they're drying out in like 3 or 4 days. So I've got to go very careful not to forget them and just let them get bone dry, and they'll suffer badly and start losing roots and things. So I've got to keep my eye on it. But the little humidity trays shows how much humidity this Ceramis can give off. I'm topping those trays up. They're a bit full at the moment. They don't work as well. When they're full like that, I presume the camera can see it, they're a bit flooded. Now that's not going to give off anywhere near as much water as when it gets like this and the Ceramis pokes out the top. It's a huge surface area involved when it's like that, and that evaporates at a fair old rate. More like that one. Yeah, when the water's at that sort of level, that gives off quite a bit of humidity. But I've overcooked this one, and that one's flooded, so that won't be pushing up quite as much, believe it or not. So sometimes less is more. I love that expression. It's daft as a brush, but everybody knows what you mean when you say it. Anyway, that'll do for today, and thanks for watching and all that stuff. Just a few bits and bobs as I go round. As I say, it's the sort of time of year where there's stuff in bloom, there's stuff coming on, you know, to bloom down the line a bit. Some plants are pushing out new growth, some are not. Some have slowed down to next to nothing. Some of my Oncidiums are just sitting there looking at me saying, tough, I'm not going to grow till I get better light and longer day. Well, it's longer days, not better light. Quite honestly now, in here, the plants have got more light than they've ever had. So they can't complain they're not getting enough quality light, but what they can still complain about is it's not there for long enough, and there's nothing I can do about that. I'm not installing artificial lighting, not in here. I've said before, where the hell would I put it? Just look round now. Where would you put the lights? If somebody said, right, I need this place set up with some grow lights so that I can extend my day lengths, where would you put the lights? What about this shelf? Where would you put the lights? Like here somewhere? Up in amongst the vandas, touching them, hanging down from the roof with wires all over the place. And for these lower shelves, the only sensible place for the light would be hanging above the top shelf. Look how close the plants would be. And most of the stuff down here is not high light type plants anyway. That's why they're on the lower shelves. So it's just not practical. You know, one there for that shelf. Where would you put that one? Possibly one there, possibly one there, possibly one here, possibly one there. You need one there, you need one there, you need one up here. You counting? Now go and find out how much they cost and see how much that would cost, plus the wiring. No, I'm not doing it. It's not happening. I've got away without artificial lighting for the whole of the time I've been growing orchids. And in the main, they do okay. I put up with the 3 or 4 months in the winter when they slow down, which with artificial lighting wouldn't happen. So I'd get more better continuous growth. But I live without it because it's too complicated, far too costly. I've got a bill for my car coming up that's probably going to frighten the life out of me right on Christmas. That's just what I need. Still, it's got to happen. I can't be carless. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for dropping by and everything. And yeah, I'll find some bits and bobs as I go along. You know, each day most days I do something out here. There are some days when I do absolutely nothing. But all I've got left to do today is finish off soaking the Vandas. The little RO unit's busy out there, getting a bit low on water. I don't use anywhere near as much this time of year, but you know, fill up all my containers, and then I'll have to bring the RO unit in overnight, and then I'll do the Vanda bucket tomorrow and refresh the water in there. If anybody's got an RO unit that's outside, for hell's sake don't let it get down near freezing. You will blow the membrane. When water gets down to freezing, and it will freeze inside that membrane at a higher temperature than 0, because the membrane is so fine, the water in it is very, very thin. And as you know, water can freeze just above freezing. You know, that's why you get a little tiny film on the top of a puddle and the rest of the puddle isn't frozen. It's that sort of principle. But at the end of the day, when water freezes, it expands. And if it happens in your RO membrane, you've just completely shot your membrane to pieces. It will then be useless. So don't let your RO unit get down near freezing. That's why I do my work outside the RO unit. And if I have to go into the second day, which I usually have to do for the Vanda bucket, the RO unit comes in this time of year and then goes back out the next day. And if the air temperature outside was down near freezing, then I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't risk it. Even though it's got moving water going through it, I just wouldn't risk it. Those membranes are so fine and delicate. So look after your RO unit, and it'll look after your water, and then your water will look after your orchids. Circle of life and all that stuff. See you next time. I just wanted to add this bit on the end, having just watered the Tolumnias. A while ago I actually videoed unmounting all of the Tolumnias, discarding some and remounting the ones that stood of chance. And you can see from the video I was ultra careful about not getting the tags and the plants muddled up, because I had a kitchen full of Tolumnias basically. If you look at the colour of those buds, methinks we may have a tag problem, because there's no way that those blooms are not going to have yellow in them, and that has none. So I obviously got a tag muddled up. Now you have to bear in mind, I could have got the tags muddled up prior to that exercise and then just maintained the muddle, but I don't know which one this is now, but it's certainly not that. So we'll have to wait and see. I should take that off really, that's not a strong plant. But I'm going to let it go and at least let those blooms open to see if I can identify which one it actually is. All I can say definitely is it's not the one on the tag. It's something else. But anything that's bloomed for me before I will have pictures of with their names against the plants, so hopefully I can identify it. We shall see. See you next time.